Sounds great. Thank you everyone for attending today's Southern California State and Local Transportation Need Assessment Policy Workshop. We're very excited to have you here with us today as we formally get into the development of our policy recommendation. With that, I would love to turn this over to Deputy Director Paul Golodziejski.
Hey Francis, I can't start my video, and also your audio is very muffled. I don't know if other people on the webinar are having the same experience.
Oh, thanks for letting me know, Paul. I'm speaking directly to Mike. So
okay, yes, everyone is saying it's muffled, Francis, so it's very hard to hear. I don't know if you guys can address that, but I don't think we can proceed as it is right now.
testing.
It's a little better, Francis, but still a little muffled.
Okay, if I talk really loudly, does this sound better?
That's better. You're audible. I don't know if there's a way I can give my remarks, and I don't know if you guys can continue to see if there's a way to make it clearer. But yeah, you're audible now. Anyways, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Paul Golodziejski. I'm the Chief Deputy Director at the California Transportation Commission. The Commission is developing the full report for the State and Local Transportation Needs Assessment. And, there's my camera. And we appreciate you all taking the time to participate in this workshop, which will help inform the policy recommendations in this report. Today's workshop kicks off the policy recommendations discussion and provides the opportunity to develop and discuss the assessment's first principles, which will help define the what and the why we need to invest in our transportation infrastructure. We'll also discuss some potential policy scenarios that would help address the ongoing decline in the state's fuel taxes due to the transition to zero-emission vehicles. And this work is critical to identifying a sustainable and equitable funding mechanism, as well as other policy solutions to address our state's transportation needs. Developing the needs assessment for the California legislature can only be done successfully working directly with you, our partner agencies, stakeholders, and others who have attended today. I know a lot of you are involved in planning, funding, and delivering multimodal transportation infrastructure and represent a diverse array of geographic communities. Your partnership ensures we're accurately capturing our revenue projections as well as our needs. And the needs assessment will have to clearly convey how the transition to zero emissions vehicles will impact the fuel tax revenue stream we have, and in turn, how this affects our ability to deliver accessible, resilient, transit, active transportation, and roadway projects that support the achievement of our state goals for safety, equity, climate, and the economy. So again, thank you all for joining today. I encourage you to reach out to our team as necessary. And with that, I will turn it back to Francis.
Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone.
Now there's, Francis, now there's an echo.
Hello? Can everyone hear me now?
That's perfect.
Yes, online. I can't hear them. Oh, wait. Okay, so everyone can hear me now?
I can hear you clearly, yes.
Okay, I can hear you through our laptop. I apologize for that. There was some minor technical difficulty in working it out. I think there were just a lot of outlets or choices to figure out what worked best for us today. So thank you, Paul, for your opening remarks. With that, Justin, would you be able to advance to just the agenda overview for today's workshop? Next slide, please. So I am Francis, and I am the program manager for the Senate Bill 1121 needs assessment. And as I mentioned, and as Paul had remarked, we are developing the full needs assessment report, which is due to the legislature January 1st, 2025. So we really appreciate your participation in today's workshop. And we look forward to, meeting back and bringing this information that we take away from today and our Northern California's workshop out to everyone in the summer. So in terms of the agenda, Justin Hall, my colleague, will provide a webinar logistics overview next. And I will be presenting with NCE on the status of our needs assessment preparation, what we have done today and what we are currently doing in getting the full needs assessment rolled out for our draft this summer. We'll have two discussions based on sort of the attendance we have so far. The first will be our first principles discussion for policy recommendations, and then we'll have a break if necessary. And our second discussion will be focused on what potential policy recommendations we want to put forth in our needs assessment. Followed by that, I will provide an overview of our delivery schedule for the needs assessment report, and Laura Pennebaker will wrap up and provide next steps. So with that, Justin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Francis. And welcome to the CTC Senate Bill 1121 Needs Assessment Workshop. The CTC exists to make transportation planning, funding, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our workshops can take place in diverse locations around the state so that commissioners and staff can hear directly from our stakeholders around California. We are pleased to now offer hybrid and fully virtual workshops to allow our stakeholders the opportunity to participate more fully no matter where you are. The workshop agenda is located on our website at www.catc.ca.gov. Live closed captioning is available on this webinar. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose from. Any document the CTC creates can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov, and we will have them returned to you as quickly as possible. For all our workshops, we encourage interaction with our stakeholders. There will be opportunity for questions and comments at the end of this workshop. For those attending via Zoom, you should see the webinar control panel, likely located on the bottom of your screen. There you will find the raise hand and Q&A tabs. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as soon as we reach the public comment item to give the system time to acknowledge you. Commission staff will let you know when it's your turn to make your comment. Alternately, you may use the Q&A tab to submit your comment or question. Commission staff will read that on your behalf. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link or phone number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants, as this can create confusion for staff when making comments. Please do your best to be concise. Please make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Justin. If you could proceed to the next slide, please. Oh, there you are. So this is a high-level update of what we've been doing so far in terms of preparing for the development of the full needs assessment. We've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, gathering a lot of information. So I'm just gonna provide a high-level background update again of what the intent of Senate Bill 1121 is. The next slide. And then I will turn it over to Linda after this. So just as a reminder, Senate Bill 1121 requires the commission to prepare a 10-year statewide transportation needs assessment. It highlights that we need to assess the cost to operate, maintain, and grow the statewide multimodal transportation system, and consider the costs to address climate resiliency and compare those costs against available transportation revenue. So we've been gathering information on tracking what our transportation needs are and sort of what the revenue outlook has been. And next slide, please. And I will turn this over to Linda Pierce, the principal and program manager or project manager over at NCE, who's working with us on the development of the needs assessment.
Fantastic. Thank you, Francis. So I'm just going to kind of hit some of the key points of the survey. It was sent out last winter, early spring of this year, by the commission staff looking for information related to the status of the regional transportation plans, a 10-year multimodal transportation needs, and then the 10-year revenue projections as well. And really, it's really to kind of capture what type of information is needed and all that. It's quite an extensive survey, and it was very detailed. And there was a full understanding that the information requested may not be exactly the same as how the agency reported it. So we're kind of still going through the process here and trying to establish, making sure that we're not double counting or we've got the right information, and our interpretation of the results are as intended by the agency. So that still is a work in progress, but we're pretty well down the road on being able to provide that the results of the survey. Next slide, please. So the kind of this slide just captures the general categories for the needs and the revenue. We're looking at, I won't go through all of them, but it's really to bring together complete streets, highways, local roads, a little bit on the rail, the transit operations, and other sources as far as what the needs are. And the other is quite a big category. But when you do a survey, you want to make sure that you capture other categories that may not have been noted. And so that's where that other category is kind of a catch-all for everything. On the revenue side, it's the same type of a breakdown. We're looking at federal, local, state, tolls, transit, and then of course other. But on the revenue side, for the other category, we actually got a lot of the responses indicated what that other was. So we've got a pretty good sense of that on the revenue side. Next slide, please. So looking at the state highway needs and revenue, it really was obtained from the State Highway System Management Plan. Looking at that, last one was done in 2023. And the way the Caltrans identifies, they go needs programs are based on, safety, primary assets, which include pavements and bridges. Supplementary assets are bike and ped facilities, weigh and motion sites, and looking at the system resiliency now includes bridge scour, mitigation, some emergency damage, both kind of the reactive and then the long-term repair of emergency damage. And then the other category includes ADA pedestrians, commercial vehicle enforcement facilities, other types of building and efforts to just kind of maintain the whole process. On the investment side, it's a little bit simpler. It's kind of combined into maintenance, the shop historical, which is just the classic what they've always been using, and then the shop new objectives really are from since the 2019 SHSMP, which an example of that includes some mobility, some bike and ped infrastructure, fish and wildlife connectivity, climate adaptation and resiliency. So it's all kind of a kind of the newer type of investments that they make. All right, next slide, please. Oop, I think we skipped one, did we, Francis, or we didn't? Oh, I guess we
No.
didn't. Okay.
No, we did not.
Okay, sorry. Do you mind to pause, Francis, or just keep going?
Linda, you can keep going.
Okay. So the next, I'm just going to kind of talk about the ZEV revenue impact studies that we took a look at. Next slide, please. And just really, again, I think a lot of you have seen these slides, but just to get everybody on the same page, we're all looking at the greenhouse gas reduction goals set out by the different assembly bills and the Senate bills. There's 3 of them that really kind of set the tone of the approach. First one being in 1990, and excuse me, the first one was in 2006, and really has set the first the emission targets to be able to reach the 1990 levels as of 2020. And so that's kind of an aggressive approach to get us there, at least to start the process. Then in 2016, kind of extending the target goals that were established in the 2016 Assembly Bill. Now we're looking at getting to a level of 40% below the 2020 emissions by 2030. And then finally, the most recent bill in 2022 went ahead and extended the target to 85% below 1990 level by 2045, and then carbon neutrality by 2045 as well. And so the graph really kind of shows where we are today. And so the kind of the darker grayish greenish block is kind of showing the reduction in the miles of metric tons of carbon dioxide. And so you can see we're actually below the target right now. So that's a great incentive, or it's a great outcome. But looking at the slope of the curve, so the little dashed line on the right side of the graph, we're going to have to be a lot more aggressive in reducing the carbon dioxide equivalent to be able to meet those goals set out by the 2016 and the 2022 legislation. So California is doing great, but we actually are going to have to improve the rate of reduction to be able to meet those goals. Next slide, please. So there's the couple of studies that we're looking at. So certainly CARB, it kind of led the direction on a lot of the studies, and looking at both the 2022 Advanced Clean Cars Act or approach, and then the sorry about that, and the 2022 scoping plan. So on the Advanced Clean Cars, this is where we're looking at reducing increasing the number of ZEV sales, so zero emission vehicles, and SUVs by 2023, increasing that by 16%. Then looking at being able to also do all passenger cars, trucks, and SUVs, have them all be ZEVs by 2035. So again, a pretty aggressive approach to get to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Then the scoping plan, again, takes it a little bit further, and we're now looking at wanting to have all light-duty vehicle sales. So again, cars, trucks, and SUVs are ZEVs by 2035. We're looking at 100% of medium and heavy-duty truck sales. So this is going to be the UPS truck, the semi-trailer type of rigs, and looking at them to be 100% ZEVs by 2040. And then there's also a goal to reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled, because you kind of have to have both to be able to to hit those GHG targets. Next slide, please. So this is looking at the May 2023. Now they brought in an advanced clean fleets, and so now we're looking at trucks. And so again, the new medium and heavy duty sales are ZEVs by 2036, and that all seaport and railway trucks are ZEVs by 2035. And then there's a phased in approach for federal, state, and local agency vehicles. And so this little chart is kind of showing you that approach, so that, you know, the delivery trucks, the buses with 2 axles, so the smaller of the medium heavy duty trucks vehicles, you kind of can see that by 2025, they want 10% of the new sales. And then by 2035, there's 100%. And then there's a phased approach. And you can see the years and the percent of vehicle sales with that given year. The same on the work trucks. So we're looking now at like a construction dump truck, the larger buses with 3 axles. And again, the 100% goal is obtained in 2039. And then the same thing with the sleeper tractors. And so this is the larger 18-wheeler and specialty vehicles would then be 100% ZEV by 2042. So it's a phased in approach. It makes it a little easier for everybody, but it still is an aggressive schedule. Again, trying to meet those CARB goals. All right, next slide, please. So there's a couple of different studies that we're given a look at. Certainly the Legislative Analyst Report, the LAO. We're looking at what are the climate policies, assessing the California climate policies, and what are the impacts on funding, on state transportation funding and programs. The Mineta Transportation Institute also did a pretty extensive study, again, looking at how electrical vehicle policies will impact the revenue over up until 2040. And then finally, the preliminary needs assessment analysis that was conducted by the CTC staff and with some oversight and review by NCE. So we've got those 3 different studies that we took a pretty deep dive into. Next slide, please. And so this is just it's really interesting to take a very detailed analysis that was done by each of these studies and put it into a slide. And this is what we've done. So the thing I want to make sure you can very quickly go from the left side of the study to the right side that says the revenue reduction. And I want to be extremely careful in doing that because each of the studies assumed different things. And so it's not a one-to-one comparison on any of them because all 3 studies did something slightly different. So that's where I did the attempt to, with this general approach to show you a little bit about what is different between the studies. So the LAO report is pretty much going with the 85% ZEVs by 2045. They want to reduce the VMT and improve the fuel efficiency. Then the other study the other scenario they were looking at was taking 65% of the new car sales or the new vehicle sales would be ZEVs by 2045 and an improved fuel efficiency. So really the only difference between those 2 obviously is the amount of ZEVs being sold or the amount of ZEVs being purchased, and then there is no reduced VMT in the second scenario. From that, they're looking at a revenue reduction over the 20-year period of about 0.44 billion per year. Similarly, the needs assessment that was done, we took a look at. There's a couple of different scenarios, but we're gonna show you the one that looked at being able to meet the advanced clean cars 2. As well as the clean fleet, and then there was an improved fuel efficiency. So there was no reduction in VMT. That resulted in about a $0.55 billion per year loss in revenue. The Mineta, sorry about the dog. The Mineta Institute did a variety. I think they did 8 different scenarios. looking at changes in vehicle miles traveled, in the ZEV adoption rate. So what's the percent of vehicles sold are ZEVs, and they also looked at improving the fuel efficiency. And so these 8 different scenarios ranged in revenue reduction, but overall it was about up to a 0.53 per year reduction in revenue from that study. Next slide, please. I think I extend this back to you, Frances.
Yes, that's correct, Linda. Thank you for the brief overview. And I think as we dive into the first principle discussion, we really wanted you to have a chance to take away sort of what we're seeing so far as the potential revenue reduction over the 10 years, out 10 years, essentially based on some of the reports that are out and preliminary analysis that we've been doing here with NCE as well. So with that, why don't we go straight into the breakout discussion? I think we're all just going to have one big breakout discussion together in here and also online. So Justin and Doug will be helping us moderate all the questions and ensure that everything gets asked and you know, we capture all your answers. So next slide, please. So we had wanted to discuss with all our stakeholders this concept of first principles. So it's very similar to what CalSTA had developed around their 4-4+2 and similar to I guess the CTP 2050 goals, but this is sort of framing our discussion around what is important to us overall in defining our approach in the needs assessment. So what you see here on the screen are proposed first principles that we would like to capture in our needs assessment. And we wanted to essentially capture your thoughts on what you think of them. You know, does this capture what you feel is important, framing what transportation investments need to accomplish in the future, what might be missing, and do any more first principles need to be added, sort of based on the overarching situation that we're facing with our projected transportation revenues. So that is essentially what I wanted to go over as our first principles today, and we will keep this slide up and open it up for any questions that you may have, any suggestions at this point in time. So this is really to, again, solicit feedback on helping us frame the policy, you know, section really of this report and help us further guide, you know, the scenario that we end up going with once the full needs assessment is out. So I will, please, if you have any questions, raise your hand or pop your question in the Q&A.
It came up in the chat, but then it disappeared. There it is.
That or I can read it out. All right, Francis, we did receive one written question during this time comes from William Walker. He asks, how were the principles developed? Who was consulted to develop them?
Hi, William. Sorry, I just saw another question pop up. So, William, we took essentially the core 4+2 as a foundation to just kind of propose some of these first principles. So, today's really the first stab at looking in and thinking about how we want to capture what our first principles should encompass, and again, how they will frame the needs assessment. So it is built on some existing information that is out there for us to assess. And so we are now consulting with everyone on how this feels to them. Let me know if that answers your question.
All right, our next discussion question comes from Sarkis Kachik. They ask, how does providing additional funding for transit and rail providers for expanded service fit into the first principles?
That's an excellent question, Sarkis. Thank you for raising it. So in terms of how those particular types of investments are being factored into this work, how we are looking at it as staff, and we'd appreciate, your perspective as stakeholders, we really see the need to be able to invest in not only, infrastructure, but also operations and maintenance as being part of the multimodal accessibility or multimodal mobility, first principle. That's where we were attempting to try and capture the need for those types of services. Does that answer your question? And does that make sense to tie it to that first principle? Okay.
Moving on to our next question. Comes from an anonymous attendee. They ask, what is being considered under economic development? Will freight mobility be addressed by this policy lens?
Hi. Yes, freight mobility will be kind of captured under the economic development. I think, it's a huge factor in part of California's economy. And so these sort of principles are meant to also be broad as well in that essence, to be able to capture sort of all our driving sort of needs and contributions there. Oh.
I'm going to move now to a virtual hand raise we have. Mark Watts, you're now free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
There you go.
Mark Watts? Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
thank you very much. So I'm looking at the questions, and the second question is the one that's been front and center for me the entire lifespan of working on transportation issues. Maintaining transportation system infrastructure and safety. To me, yes, those are probably more important than equity and multimodal mobility going forward, because without a system obviously, without a maintained system that's safe, you won't be able to run transit. You won't have the ability to get around at the local level. So I think that that needs to be elevated, but I'm willing to be convinced otherwise. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your comment. So I should have said from the get-go that these were not provided in any sort of rank and order. We kind of put it out there, to kind of provide a view of what needs to be done on a comprehensive level. These are all sorts of needs in the state and things that we have gotten feedback in some shape or form as well in some of our stakeholder workshops as we've or not workshops, some of our stakeholder meetings and discussions with others. So I did want to say that these are just all of our first principles. This was not done in a ranking order, just kind of put up there for the slide. So I will be very honest in that capacity.
And I would just, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would just add to that, we're approaching these first principles, I would say similar to how other statewide policy objectives are developed and shared. Like if you look at the goals for the California Transportation Plan, for example, those are all considered to be like co-equal goals. One thing I do want to point out, Mark, that I think you raised that was very important is that, maintenance and operation and just functionality of the existing system is so critical. And, we plan to make sure that that is front and center in the needs assessment and in any messaging that we do around this effort. But just reiterating again that the first principles are co-equal goals, right? Things that we want to make sure are each considered as we go through this process.
All right, next I'll move to a written question that comes in from Jamie Lederman. They ask, how will these principles be related to needs assessment? For maintaining system and infrastructure, there is a clear need, but we haven't even discussed what the goal is. 100% good repair or a lower target? And related, if some of these are for capital investments, how are we going to decide on need? Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Jamie, for both of these questions. So this is exactly why we wanted to have this workshop and to start talking through some of these principles and the nuance that needs to happen within their development. So in terms of the actual target that is set, I think we're open to maybe what exists out there already in current statewide plans. So if those of you who are out, in practice believe that, picking a threshold that is sort of I would say industry standard, so to speak. So I think of what might be articulated in the State Highway System Management Plan, or, within other, long-range transportation plans at the regional level. I think we definitely want to be clear on what the intended outcome is, but not necessarily come up with a new threshold if we don't have to. So that is how we're looking at that. Does that make sense? Do you have any follow-up questions or feedback? I didn't answer the second part of your question, sorry. So in terms of deciding on need, I think I might need to get a little clarification, but I'll go ahead and take a stab at answering it. So in terms of need, how we've attempted to define that is by asking regional agencies to look at essentially 10 years worth of planned investment within their regional transportation plans. And we've asked them to really look at not just the constrained need that they have to identify, but also if they had, additional revenue, like what would be sort of the full suite of investments that would need to be made in that 10-year period. So I think that the need is really coming from those plans.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Next, I'm going to go to Anita Balan. Anita, you're now free to unmute yourself and make your comment. Anita Balan.
Sorry, I did not have a comment.
Can you turn on your sound in your webinar? Am I over? Oh, sure. Oh, no, I can just talk. Doesn't want to cause feedback, so good thing I did. So is that working?
Hey, Doug and Laura, if you guys are talking in the room, we cannot hear on the webinar.
That makes more sense. That's yeah, there we go. Hi. So again, I'm William Walker. I am the chair of the Equity Advisory Committee, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the committee. I'll just kind of elaborate on where my written comment was about talking about where these principles came from. I heard a comment earlier about equity and accessibility not necessarily being something that should be uplifted over maintaining transportation system and infrastructure. But sometimes equity and accessibility doesn't cost anything. And so when I walked into the District 7 building today, I was asked if I was here for LADOT or for Caltrans. And then I was asked for my license or state issued ID or passport. And I have a privilege that I'm a US citizen and I have those documents. There are definitely days I've lost those documents and don't have access to them. But equity and accessibility is just something as simple, and I appreciate that there's two formats that you can come here on Zoom if you can't come in person. But I'd be very afraid if someone came in person and wasn't able to access the building because they didn't have proper ID. You shouldn't have to have documents to be a part of this process. Because people who don't have documents ride our transportation system and pay for it probably more so than some people who have documents. But that said, I also think it's equitable to maintain our transportation system and infrastructure, because when it's not maintained, those who depend on it most are those who suffer. So I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. And in some ways, they are one and the same. A maintained transportation system and up-to-date infrastructure is an equitable and accessible system. And equity and accessibility isn't just about those who are underserved, but once those who are underserved are served better, we find that it actually serves everyone who's involved. So improving a bus line that serves an underrepresented community will also serve someone that is from a higher economic status. All that said, this is a great first effort of principles, but I find that if we are able to have a local way to have these discussions in all parts of the state, and like being able to look at all parts priorities. I mean, we come to CTC meetings every month or so, where different constituent groups say that what we have as a state isn't something that is overarching. And so finding as many ways to have this forum in the 12 different districts is really important. And ensuring that the meeting is accessible enough, if it even means partnering with a few organizations in this area. I don't know if there's a bus riders union here anymore, but like there was one. There's SEHA, there are a number of groups in all parts. I shouldn't name groups because they're all over LA County and throughout the Southern California region. So, but as far as what I think could be added right now, I think a principle that just looks at ensuring that there's a way for different regions, whether it's Caltrans districts, whether it's whatever those regions are, being able to develop priorities that are specific to their circumstances and bringing them all together so that the first principles hit well for everyone. And I'll leave it at that for now. And thank you.
Our next written comment comes from Warren Whitaker. They ask, should there be a principle addressing funding sustainability?
Hey, Warren. Yes, actually, I think that was a comment that was made in the past. And yes, we will actually highlight how with all these, we need funding to do it. So, well, yeah, in order to get to our goals.
Up next was a written question that comes from Louis Zhao. They ask, will the first principles be broken down further to specific projects or needs?
Hi, Lewis. Thank you for this question. So if we're interpreting it like we think you're asking it, the answer would be no. We're not planning to, within these, first principle areas, identify any like specific projects. I think what we would do would be describe sort of categories or like types of investment. I think the idea is to not have this document get to the granular level of project specific information, but to really be able to clearly articulate like that we have declining revenue and we have needs that are outpacing that revenue stream, and to really be able to articulate at a high level like what those needs are. Generally, like categories of investment, talking about the importance of, just basic maintenance and rehabilitation work, the need to ensure that we are, offering as many like choices for the traveling public as possible. And in particular, highlighting, things like freight movement and just the multitude of benefits I would say that the transportation system provides. And, to William's comments earlier, the fact that having a functioning multimodal transportation system is really an issue of basic equity and quality of life.
Okay, up next, we're going to move to one of our virtual hand raises. I'd like to call on Kiana Valentine.
Hi, good afternoon. Confirming you can hear me okay? Awesome, thank you. I wanted to go back to one of the questions that just popped up in the chat related to funding, and whether there needs to be a principle around that listed here, recognizing if I think I understand how the principles support the policy recommendations, that funding recommendations need to be additive to existing resources and steer away to the greatest extent possible from shifting funds from one purpose or program to another. So I just thought I would put that on the table. I don't know how that gets incorporated into the first principles. It sort of is broadly applicable to any sort of funding policy recommendation that comes out.
And I think, thank you for that, that perspective and comment. So I think we can confirm that in this document and in this effort, we will be essentially addressing this, like the policy recommendations around a new sort of funding mechanism or way of funding transportation that acknowledges that the intent is to essentially focus on a steady revenue stream, and we're not going to be attempting to make recommendations around sort of the expenditure of that money in any certain way. I think we want to make sure and not count our chickens before they're hatched, so to speak. And so I think the idea is to identify the need for a new type of revenue mechanism and to save the conversation around expenditure, for, different processes than this one for sure.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
So hopefully I can go. All right, cool. Can you hear me? Great. So I appreciate Kiana Valentine's comments. And I think that it's very important to understand what the funding outlook looks like moving forward, considering that the gas tax will continue to decrease as electric vehicles are continue to be adopted in the state of California. And so I know that it's kind of a difficult item for commission staff to put forth, because it might even seem like out of the purview of the commission to determine making funding a principle, because that's above and beyond the budgeting process. But as a lay citizen of California, I know that this isn't the first time we've faced shrinking budgets, and it's important, especially with the new technologies that we're purchasing. The newer buses cost more, and we don't know what a mid-year overhaul of a battery bus even looks like right now, right? So, so making sure that we are thinking about what the funding future looks like. I'm not sure how we word it as a principle here, and I'm not sure how we align around it, but that's something that I think is critical, because otherwise we're not going to be able to move forth everything that's here without understanding that funding picture. And as far as what I can do in my role as chair of EAC is bring this discussion to our committee. And so I will definitely share this with the committee. Our next meeting is in August, and we may have some subcommittee meetings pertaining to these issues before August. And I'm happy to ensure that when we do discuss it, to look at how we break down equity and accessibility for this whole process. And it can't just be based upon our committee, it'll also be based upon public comment at future meetings and with stakeholders, much like everyone who's attending this meeting. Thank you.
And I will say, as staff member, that's something that I was gearing up to work with the EAC to kind of broaden our outreach effort, since I know that the first principles as a first stab right now, like I said, as a starting point, is something that would be very important for our stakeholders to provide input on. So I apologize for not being able to get there faster. That is the intent.
I mean, you've invited us to each of these meetings, so we're here. As we develop our structure, we will continue to figure out what that looks like. But that's why I've been very eager to attend these meetings. So thank you.
All right, up next, we have a written comment that came from Warren Whitaker. They write, the start of the discussion of need is critical. For example, the latest CTP assumes significant transit investment and market share that goes well beyond what can be funded and planned regionally and suggests a massive need. This is critical if we are to meet statewide goals for carbon neutrality, equity, and accessibility. Thank you. The next question comes from Mark Watts. He asks, will written questions submitted through the workshop be available later? To answer that, yes.
Also, importantly, I'd note that a recording of this webinar will be, of this workshop will be uploaded to our YouTube channel and linked to our commission website.
We'll try to transcribe it.
Up next, we're going to go to one of our virtual hand raises. We have Mark Watts.
Excuse me, thank you very much. This is a topic that doesn't seem to show by itself within the principles we talked about. And it's something that I've become very cognizant of, and that's a lack of state, local, regional interest in really dealing with the oncoming I guess, tsunami of elderly and disabled person transportation needs. And it is something that there's a debate going on right now between Medi-Cal and the state, Medi-Cal and the federal government, the state and federal government. And in the meantime, there's not progress being made. I'm not convinced right now that this is a topic for this exercise, but it needs to be dealt with at some future, at some date, whether it's now or in the future. So thank you for putting up with that.
Yeah, so Mark, just to clarify your question, so you believe that somewhere within these first principles and this effort in general, there needs to be a recognition of what will be a growing need for elderly transportation services that will meet the needs of, folks that have limited mobility, for example, elderly members of the population. Is that?
Yes, that's it. And I apologize if I'm having voice trouble. You voiced it perfectly for me, and that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Mark. So accessibility is also intended to capture that cohort and group you just talked about. And I think that's why, we really want to have people understand what we mean by accessibility as well. We have had, even when we put the interim report out for public comment, that was something really brought to our attention during that period. And there is recognition that we have a very large aging population right now and will continue to grow, just sort of on the demographic trend with the baby boomer generation aging. And like you said, their needs are going to be amplified across the sector, not just in transportation. So, at that high level, we do recognize that's something that in terms of the discussion, we'll be having a little bit more on, again, like helping people really understand what we mean by accessibility too.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, we received an additional written comment here. This comes from Paul Perling. They write, I recommend we consider a regional partnership principle. This funding will be tied up in the transition to alternate fuels, fleets, and increased importance of local regional funding through sales tax measures and meeting state goals. We are seeing many more RTPA, MPO-led projects in our region as state funding declines, and it would be good to enshrine that increasing cooperation somewhere. And at the moment, that concludes all written comments received. I do not see any virtual hand raises at this time. If you're looking to do so, please check that you've engaged that feature. And if you're submitting any more written questions or comments, we'll give you a few more moments. I see a hand raised in the room here. I'd like to call on William Walker.
Thank you, Justin. I also was able to listen to, I guess I listened because I wrote a comment. I listened on my way in. And when I attended this meeting a few months, or I guess it's been almost 6 months ago that these meetings started, maybe a little bit longer, we talked a lot about the transit agencies and their ability to demonstrate their needs. And I think that something that should come out of this process is an agreed upon like dashboard that there are certain metrics that, I know that there are certain metrics that the FTA wants that everyone keeps because that's tied to funding. I don't know that the state has metrics, but I'm sure there's some in regard to if you're applying to an ASIC grant and you want transportation with your housing, there's going to be some requirement, some like, does your property or does the development touch high quality transit? Meaning 15-minute or less, or rail or frequent bus. So I think that in the same vein, our first principles should also link to some key performance indicators that are kept across all regions so that we can, and that are equitable, because what a region like a rural region will say is it will never have the density to meet a metric that will defeat the larger urban areas in California, but it doesn't mean that those rural areas don't have priorities. And so I think that it's important that there is something that we can look at that's apples to apples, though, so that we can really understand where the need is most. And something I also think should be a part of our first principles process. I don't know if it's going to be a first principle, but I think that the Senate bill does a lot to ask about what the needs are of transit agencies, but it's important to center the needs of the transit riders as well, because often, even in Los Angeles County for more than a decade, this region was under a consent decree because the priorities of the management of the transit agency were not the same as those of the riders. And the court stepped in and said, actually, you should be listening to your riders. So making sure that, when the slides are talking about the needs, showing what that need looks like, showing what our transit facilities look like in these slides, so that it actually gives people a reason to understand where those needs are most. So, and I know I didn't capture all of what I mean, but I hope we can continue to, elaborate on that through this process.
I think that the next slide is just a break. And so if there are no more questions on the first principles right now, or none that you can come to, you can always email us for any follow-up. But I do want to pivot to Laura because I think she wanted to make a quick statement.
Sorry, I will not take much time before this break. But one thing I wanted to put out for folks to consider in this realm of first principles, when we talk about safety, I think we all see that, as like safety of the system, right? Like physical safety for folks who are using the system. But as we talk about the funding mechanism in and of itself, I think we should also be thinking about safety in terms of like security and privacy. And so I was thinking that as we build out sort of that area, that first principle area, we can make sure it's broadened to incorporate those things. So just wanted to make sure folks agreed that that was important and staff can work on that.
I know like people like their breaks. I concur, and actually that's something that came to mind on my way here, and so I'm really glad that you stated it. It's important that we have the communities that are impacted most by how those safety measures will be implemented. And there's a big push right now in Los Angeles County, or at least a debate. I don't know if it's a push yet because there's a number of different motions related to it at the LA Metro Board, but like looking at our ambassador programs expanded. Are ambassadors enough? Should Metro have its own dedicated police force? It had a security force more than a decade ago that was disbanded. And what does that safety look like for riders, and how do we ensure that that safety and privacy doesn't impede upon communities that already feel over surveilled because of not paying their fare and feeling that the repercussions were too high, or not understanding how to access the fare free programs, which puts them in a situation of not paying their fare. And then folks who live on the transportation right of way, whether that's Caltrans state highway right of way, or transit busway, or streetcar or subway right of way. And there's safety issues of whether people have a right to be in those spaces, whether those folks have somewhere else to be, and how you address it without criminalizing it, because we want to make sure that everyone feels safe and wants to use our system. So all of that is going to be something that's large that we have to tackle. And I think that it was evident in my comment about even just walking into the Caltrans building today. So I hope that we can definitely center it in our work.
All right, I think we can move to taking a short break and return in 10 minutes. So stretch your legs, get some water, bio break. So we'll see you back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. We will now focus this next half of the meeting on our policy recommendations discussion. And so these are similar sort of starting points of what sort of potential recommendations we will want to put forth in our full needs assessment report. And so these are the scenarios to kind of that are just proposed and to get us talking about what may need to be fleshed out. Is there another scenario we want to work through? Is there more detail in these, like, you know, again, just proposed scenarios. These are not necessarily fully thought out or by any means. So next slide, Justin. And these are the potential scenarios, you know, to address the gas tax revenue decline. Again, you know, it's just 4 that are put out here. They have not been vetted. I think the first and last one kind of are a little more straightforward. Do nothing is a scenario. I don't think any of us want to, but you know, what would that look like, right? Like if we did not do anything, what would that look like? And so I think in the report we can provide that and show, you know, just not how great things look. You know, scenario 2 is increase existing mechanism. So meaning, what if we increase the gas tax and the RIF? What would that look like? How much would it take, you know, potentially, you know, and recognizing how challenging that might be. Scenario 3, what if we did a phased in approach for road charge? What if we only, you know, what does that look like? Is that just doing a road charge for EVs for the time being? You know, what are those sorts of challenges and complications? You know, do we want to do that? Is it too hard for us to do a phased in approach? And then, you know, scenario 4, you know, a fully implemented road charge. The asterisk is really saying, like, you know, things have been worked out, like, how would that like look like? And obviously, you know, Caltrans is currently leading the effort on the road charge pilot program. So we'll be able to kind of see how that goes out right now as they're about to roll that out. So we're very excited to see yeah, how that's working. We do have other states that have, you know, adopted some of these like scenarios and other states, and we can look to them to those states as well, you know, in exploring scenario 4 a little more as well. So I am now going to turn it to the Q&A function of everyone kind of putting in their questions and thoughts on, you know, again, as a starting point of discussion for what to do with the declining gas tax revenue, essentially, and, you know, what other scenarios we may want to consider that have not been put forth here. So just happy to get your thoughts on this and what else we should be considering as we develop the recommendations in the full needs assessment.
Right. So,
I'm now unmuted. Yeah. William Walker with the Equity Advisory Committee, speaking for myself. I think that in addition to the 4 scenarios, I think that there needs to just be like a scenario that says what we would pay for gasoline if there were a road charge. Because if we were to implement road charge today with the current system that we have, understanding what gas tax revenues come in based upon the number of miles traveled by however many millions of cars there are, probably scarily, probably 40 million, just like there's 40 million people. But like, would gas be $2 a gallon? Like, would it be cheaper than in Alabama? Like, that's, I think, because all people can see with this is a doomsday scenario. But if they could understand with their current budget what gas costs, or what a Tesla charging a plug-in might cost, or not just Tesla, any electric vehicle, I think it would help to just help people understand that, like, hey, maybe your gas price will lower. I mean, I don't know, like, and I don't know if that makes sense, but I would imagine that there will still be gasoline if there's a road charge. So you probably wouldn't keep the gas tax the same. And if we had to keep the gas tax the same, then we need to question if the road charge is high enough. And then also, I think looking at how to create, like, SB1 funding, I guess, goes to UCITS among other research centers in California, and there's also the TRB. But like, what if there were just a contest to do a media campaign that talks about what this would look like? Because I saw the video that we had at one of the previous CTC meetings, but and I think it was done by the Housing Plus Transportation Committee that works on CapDI and works with the other interagency space of this work. And video is cute, but like, I just don't know that, like, it reaches everyone. And there's not one video that will ever reach anyone. So like, that's why we have multiple channels, and especially today where there are people that don't even look at television or listen to the radio. So understanding like what monolingual non-English speaking communities might want to see in that video, understanding what working class folks might want to see versus middle working class versus like lower income working class. So those are the things that come to mind initially, and I'll stop there to let other folks.
All right, I'll move to some of our written questions received during this time. First one comes from Michelle Smith. They ask, as EV incentives start to decline, have we taken into account if the additional fees added to EV vehicles will make buying an EV even less desirable?
I can answer that. Hi, Michelle. Yes, so, you know, in some of the preliminary analysis, we are exploring what some of these fees may have to look like. And so that's partially why for our needs assessment, we just kind of want to go back and look and kind of work through what that may look like. You know, we do have some things in statute currently. And so, again, it's just something that we have considered and are looking into, but kind of balancing sort of how that's rolled out, I guess, stated and shown in our revenue decline. But it's a good question.
Up next, we have a written question that comes from Warren Whitaker. They ask, what about non-state sources? Assumptions on federal and local, regional?
Hey, Warren. Yes, and that's the other side where we've worked with all our regional partners on gathering that information as we're kind of working through the information that's been submitted to us. We want to make sure that, like, when we get to that point of our analysis, that, you know, it's as accurate, I guess you can say, as possible, because as part of the broader outlook, especially within just the local regional side, that needs to be considered how our needs and revenue declines are being assessed at the statewide level. So that's we are doing that. And I do know that at the federal level, there has been sort of discussion on what to do there. And we will take that into account. Obviously, we have the federal excise tax that's separate from us, but we are accounting for that as well.
Thank you. The next written question comes from Sarkis Kachik. They ask, can we add a scenario where we account for the decline in gas tax revenue and consider a road charge fee that is not revenue neutral, or will that be included in a different area of the analysis?
Thank you, Sarkis. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think you are wanting to include in sort of the assessment scope, or as, you know, a potential additional scenario, something that goes beyond gas tax replacement, like beyond sort of this idea of like revenue neutral. And so I think that in terms of how we do that in this document will have to be sort of a carefully orchestrated endeavor. I think because road charge, as we have been like mandated by the legislature to study it, is as a revenue neutral replacement to the gas tax. I think the idea behind this assessment is that we are able to offer like additional tools or options that, you know, would potentially go beyond revenue neutrality. I just don't believe that we are able to do that like through a road charge. I think that is where we might want to touch on other tools that are available that are more geared towards like the management of specific corridors, you know, roadway pricing, for example, in that regard. So I would say that the answer to your question is yes, but I don't know that we would necessarily want it to be a specific scenario as opposed to like a bit more of like a menu of tools. Does that make sense? And I'm definitely open to, you know, the thoughts of others on this. I think just the bottom line for like us as commission staff, and I think I'd, you know, be fair to speak for Caltrans as well on this, is, you know, the road charges is being currently studied is, you know, as a revenue neutral replacement. So I think we would have to discuss anything beyond revenue neutrality through a different like mechanism. Hopefully that made sense. Made sense in my head before I started talking.
We have Sarkis with his hand raised and he's unmuted. Sarkis, go ahead. Sarkis Kachik, I saw that you had your hand raised. You are now unmuted and free to comment. Okay.
Oh,
Never
sorry.
mind.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, user error. My apologies. Yeah, that I hear you, Lauren, and that makes sense. I guess I was just coming from the position of if we're ripping the Band-Aid off on the gas tax and going to a new kind of way to impose a fee on people, I just figured it may be worthwhile to look at how the gas tax has declined in recent years with the advent of EVs and, you know, higher more fuel efficient vehicles, and if there's a way to make up for it, because our roads, with inflation, the cost of improving or maintaining roads has gone up while revenues have declined. So I was just looking to see if there's a way to catch up for that. But I hear you that you guys have certain processes in place that you have to follow. So thank you.
Okay. Are there any other additional sort of comments or suggestions, questions on some of the potential scenarios, you know, just that are laid out here thus far? Or are there any scenarios that you feel would best address our decline in transportation revenue around here. I think realistically, with all the work that the state has been doing, road charge in whatever shape or form is probably the most, is the front runner, I would say, in our policy recommendations. I don't think that would be a misguided statement around that. It's just more of like, in what form, essentially.
We do have one of our virtual attendees with their hand raised at this time. I'd like to call on Warren Whitaker.
Thanks. Yeah, this kind of builds off of, I think, both Sarkis's and Francis' both comments. When you're thinking about the scenarios, and I understand the position that the state's in, and you essentially have your hands partially tied by how the RUC has been described. At the same time, I think we need to be realistic that if we are going to be achieving what's been laid out, whether through CARB's multiple work on, the scoping plan or on the CTP, the kind of investments that we need to do in active transportation, the reduction in vehicle miles traveled, and especially as, we're transitioning to greater and greater share of the fleet being non-internal combustion engine. You do have to influence behavior. And I know the state is pretending that, the transition to the RUC doesn't impact behavior. But, to Sarkis's point, yes, those mechanisms need to be in place. And, just the sole reliance on the regional or local revenues to do that is likely not enough, because there's only so much that regions can do on their own. It really requires a lot of leadership on the state side, which, sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't. And so I think that's why there's perhaps, those questions keep on coming up. And I understand and I appreciate the difficult position that it is, but we have to have those conversations, and, we have to put on all the issues that are on the table. That if we are going to be carbon neutral by 2045, it means that likely, yes, it's going to cost a heck of a lot more to drive if we want to continue to have people driving around. And at the same time, we also have to address, real issues like equity and providing alternatives for those who now, no longer can travel by car whenever they want on whatever route they want. So, yeah, I just want to, reiterate it. Obviously, I'm a full supporter of what you guys are trying to do, but just wanted to, make sure that we're also having those hard conversations in this. So thanks.
Thanks, Warren, for your comment. And I think to kind of capture, what you, I think, and also what Sarkis was saying earlier, would the gas tax be enough? Like, if it were replaced with a revenue neutral road charge, correct? I mean, in some, I think that's really the heart of the question. And I think, what other mechanisms may be available to us as you, to kind of help really meet these targets that are set out by the state that we need to meet. And so, I think that's a really good question. And I feel like that's a really good discussion point that we'll have as we're able to bring forward more of our analysis in the upcoming months, and what else can be done in that realm to accomplish our statewide goals and targets set forth for all of us to meet, and maybe, what the regions really have to do to get there as well. I think that.
Thank you, Francis. I'm not seeing any other virtual attendees at this time indicating they wish to comment or ask a question.
All right. I think I can just roll into our timeline, the next slide, and wrap up the next steps after that. So really another 5 minutes. Next slide, Justin. So this is just the full needs assessment report timeline. We are now in the spring, headed into summer, and thankfully, none of you will have to experience 102-degree weather next week with us in Sacramento. So, so we will have a second policy recommendations workshop on June 18th in Sacramento. It is a hybrid format, like I said here. So for any additional colleagues that would like to participate and provide feedback that was not able to at this session, they're welcome to join us online. Hopefully we'll be able to see people in person too at our Sacramento location. We will be kicking our kind of revamping up now with our stakeholder work group meetings, because we've just been really working through processing all the information we had gathered the last few months. So we actually have something tangible to bring and comment on there. In the summer, we do intend to have a working draft of the Senate Bill 1121 needs assessment. So something rough for people to look on before, we provide that polished draft in the fall at the October meeting. And then in December, we'll bring back the needs assessment with all the comments and have it finalized and sent to the legislature on January 1st, 2025. So very straightforward in terms of that. They will be brought at each commission meeting. So you will definitely see me the second half of this year at the commission meetings. And then we can go to the next slide and I'll turn it over to Laura.
Okay, thanks, Francis. So really, in terms of wrap up and next steps, I wanted to end by just making sure that you all know how much we appreciate the time that you've spent on this workshop and the feedback that you have given us. We have been doing our best to capture it, in our notes. And as Doug had mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website. So if you go to www.catc.ca.gov, you go to meetings and events and you hit the workshops tab. All the meeting materials and eventually the recording of this will be available there. Should you or others in your organization, wish to revisit any of the discussion. I wanted to just call out some things that, I know really resonated with myself, and I think Francis would agree, that in terms of how we further develop, these first principles is really the need to uplift this concept of a new replacement revenue mechanism, really being focused on sustainability and stability of that revenue source. I'm really making sure that that revenue source is equitable, is not regressive, is not disproportionately impacting, lower income users of the system. We heard the need for our first principles to address engagement and meeting community needs through this process. Also, the importance of regional partnership in whatever funding mechanisms we land on, because we as the state rely heavily on what local and regional governments leverage, right? They are bringing a lot to the table, and that should be recognized in this process. And then also, as we think about this new revenue mechanism and policy recommendations addressing safety, making sure that we're thinking about security and privacy, whether that's for data or for something like enforcement. So making sure that we're rounding out these principles in a way that they're sort of addressing the things that are, valued by, the residents of the state, and that we're making it clear that whatever we bring forward is going to try to address all these things as best it can, and we'll take them into consideration. So I think with that, we really hope that this was useful exercise. And I just want to reiterate that, ending the workshop now does not stop the ability to provide feedback. So please email us if you have any thoughts. We're also happy to, you know, jump on a meeting if you would like to have like a deep dive discussion. And yeah, we hope to see anyone who would like to attend the Northern California workshop on June 18th. And we really appreciate your partnership and thank you for your time today.
I'll be quick. I just want to plug that the next EAC meeting is in August. I actually don't have the date right in front of it's August 22nd. Sorry, and it's virtual. So we will definitely talk about being present at this meeting and some of the things that I shared. And I'd like to hear things from my colleagues as well. So we invite you to also come to the Equity Advisory Committee, and for folks that couldn't make it at this time, maybe our time is better. So just definitely send them our way. Thank you. And you guys, thank you all for your work today.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.